it's necessary to know how much of the world is invisible to you, because unless you have some understanding of how much of the world is invisible, you can't understand how many things might be going wrong when something goes wrong. And so here's a hint in some sense. If something interferes with the integrity of your categories, all the snakes that are inside those categories come out, and then you have to deal with all those snakes. And that's a big problem. And so you don't like having your categorical systems, the adequacy of your categorical systems challenged in any way, and it's no wonder. And it seems to me that this is particularly relevant with regards to social conflict between different ethnic groups, or between groups that have been historically isolated from one another to some degree, because the groups come at the world with different conceptual structures, and they're not necessarily isomorphic. Some of the more fundamental assumptions might not be the same from one place to another. And that means the validity of the categories that both of those groups use to organize their existence in the world come under assault when they meet. So, it's a big problem, and you know, you might say, well, why do people engage in conflict all the time? And part of the reason is because there is conflict. Like if you believe one thing and I believe another, and we happen to occupy the same territory, and those beliefs have implications for how we're going to behave, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be conflict, and as far as I can tell, there's a very limited number of ways that that conflict can be resolved. One is I can become a tyrant, or you can, which one of us is a tyrant and one of us is a slave, and that, you know, the logical end point to that is one of us is alive and one of us is dead, and the other possibility is that we can negotiate and see if we can figure out how to cohabit in this territory, behaviorally and conceptually, simultaneously, for a long time. But that's extraordinarily difficult, because it means you have to take your concepts apart where they conflict, and then you have to figure out how to put them back together in a manner that actually works. So when you might say, well, you should be tolerant, it's like, yeah, you better be tolerant, because you'll never get along with anybody if you're not. But you should be tolerant is no answer to this question, because the question is, well, how tolerant should you be and under what conditions? And believe me, you can be too tolerant. That's easy. Sure, I mean, I gave you an example last week. I think it's one that I really like. You're in a relationship with someone and they betray you. Your category is not adequate. Now, which category? Oh, well, there's a big problem, you know. The answer is, you don't know which category, right? Because you don't know where the error is. Now, obviously, there's an error of assumption, but at what level and with what category? So the problem is that an anomaly of any seriousness calls the validity of the conceptual system as such into question at some unspecifiable degree. You actually don't know. And that's a big problem, because what it means is that it's very difficult not to react catastrophically to anything that's unexpected. Because the unexpected thing could have virtually infinite consequences. Now, usually it doesn't, but what good is usually? Usually is not that helpful. So, okay, so fine. So, the world's a very, very complex place, and it's doing unpredictable things, and it's doing unpredictable things at multiple levels of analysis simultaneously, and your problem is, how do you act in that environment, and how do you constrain it conceptually so that it doesn't kill you or overwhelm you? It doesn't cause you physiological or psychological damage. So that's a big problem. So